It is referred to as the architecture of the universe, and even the fingerprint of God. Sacred geometry is found throughout the natural world. Indeed, it is all around us, an aspect of the true matrix, if you have the eye to see it. It is also one of the very few subjects which appeals to both left brain and right brain ways of thinking at the same time. It satisfies the left brain's desire for logical, sequential, and objective data, or to put it simply, looking at the parts. It also satisfies the right brain's desire for random, intuitive, and subjective data, the study of the whole. It is simply not possible to cover all aspects of sacred geometry. People have spent entire lifetimes contemplating just one aspect of sacred geometry, such as a rabbi studying the Kabbalistic tree of life. I will do my best to introduce you to the basics and hopefully inspire you to research further on your own. The only logical place to start is to show you how nature created its very first pattern. Nature can also be substituted with God or Spirit, whatever is your preferred term, it doesn't matter, as they are describing the same one reality that we all share. It is also interesting to note that Genesis in the Bible essentially describes the process I'm about to show you. However, it should be told that this wisdom was most likely taken from the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, and that it is not original to the Bible. In the beginning there was the void, and within this infinite void is the Spirit of God. This Spirit has not manifested anything yet, so the Eye of Horus I'm using here to represent the Spirit of God is not a reality. In other words, essentially God and the void are one, but obviously I cannot show you God and the void as one, as they cannot be depicted graphically at the same time. That is the nature of emptiness. At this point, there are no dimensions or space, and there is no time. There is also only two options available for God: remain in this state of static omnipresence or begin creating. God will begin creation eventually, however, as there is no time, it is irrelevant to ask how long it took to make the decision to begin creating reality. Okay, so now God has decided to begin creation. But before this can happen, God needs to create a canvas on which he is to paint his masterpiece. The first thing that God does is create the 3 dimensions. It does this by projecting a beam of consciousness from a single point in all 6 directions: front, back, left, right, up and down, in equal measure. Bear in mind that the void is infinite and that distance has not been defined yet, so it does not matter how far these beams are projected from the point, it makes no difference. You must also understand that what I'm showing here graphically is not a reality. That is, the structures being created are not material in any form, they are imaginary lines, they are pure consciousness. You may need to pause or replay this video several times before the implications become apparent to you. At this point, God is halfway to creating space. In order to complete this process, it must define some boundaries, because as I mentioned before, the void is infinite, and if no boundaries are defined, then relative movements of spirits remain impossible. To define some boundaries, all God needs to do is connect the end of every point to the end of every other point. The beauty of this, and indeed the entire process itself, is that God cannot make a mistake. It is simply impossible. Once all the ends are connected, what we have is an octahedron, which if viewed from the correct perspective reveals a hexagram, also known as the Star of David. Now that some boundaries have been defined, relative movements are now possible. The single point of consciousness can now move away from the defined central location, whereas previously there was nothing to move relative to. In the Bible, Eve was supposedly created from Adam's rib. Obviously this has no relevance to the present world, except maybe with unnatural fetus creation techniques. But when this story is compared with the next step in the process, you can begin to appreciate the idea that maybe the Bible is only an exoteric recreation of an older esoteric wisdom. The octahedron is made up of purely straight lines. In sacred geometry, straight lines are considered to be male, and curved lines female. So at this point, what we have is a purely male shape. This is why the Freemasons consider the male to be the generating principle. The next step involves spinning this octahedron in one full rotation around each of the 3 axes defined previously. Again, no mistake can be made. It does not matter which direction it is spun, or in what order the axes are chosen. The end result will always be that the parameters of a perfect sphere have been traced. Now we have a purely female shape. Eve has now been created from Adam. God has now created a perfect spherical membrane, and once again, it only has two options available. It can either remain static and explore this imaginary shape for all eternity, or it can repeat the process described thus far. The only difference is now God has a reference point, the spherical membrane, on which to repeat the process. It does not matter where Spirit chooses on the membrane to begin the process, as it is a perfect sphere, thus all points are identical to each other. It cannot make a mistake. At this point, God only knows how to do two things: projecting an octahedron and creating a spherical membrane, and moving its point of awareness to what is newly created. The next step is described in Genesis in the Bible, and thus the next process is commonly referred to as the Genesis pattern. So God moves to the surface of the newly created spherical membrane and begins projecting another identical sphere. God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." This has created a very special shape called the Vesica Piscis. This shape can be found twice in your own body: the appearance of the human eye behind the eyelids, and also the lens within the eye which adjusts the focus of light. The significance of this connection demonstrates both a left brain and a right brain idea, and it certainly shocked me when I was first introduced to it. Once again, God only has two options: remain static or project another sphere. To project the third sphere, God moves to what is newly created, which is this circle equator created by the two original intersecting spheres. Again, it does not matter where God chooses on this circle as the central point for the third sphere, as all points on this circle are identical. After the third sphere is created, there is only one more rule God follows when creating the rest of the spheres which complete the first stage of this pattern. The rule is, always move to the innermost circle points before projecting another sphere. This results in the process being perfect and prevents a chaotic mess being created. At the creation of each new sphere, more and more patterns or information become available, such as the Vesica Piscis mentioned earlier. The patterns contained within after each new sphere is added is far too extensive to cover in detail. All that remains to be said is after 7 spheres have been created in a vortex-like motion, what we have as a result is known as the seed of life. This basic pattern lays the foundation for the creation of matter and the universe itself. It also gives rise to a shape known as a tube torus if the pattern is spun around the central point. This shape is the only one in existence that can fold upon itself. It is also composed of 7 equal segments, which can be displayed visually using the 7 colours of the visible light spectrum. The seed of life is not the complete pattern. There are 2 more steps to take, which each reveal yet another layer and also another new set of patterns and information. Following the rule of always move to the innermost points before projecting, God creates an additional 6 circles on top of the existing seed of life pattern. This motion is often referred to as the second vortex motion. This process is repeated once more, the third vortex motion, which finally gives rise to the next new complete pattern known as the flower of life. This pattern is found throughout the ancient world, but the oldest depiction was found at the Temple of Osiris in Egypt, etched into the granite using a process unknown to modern science. Once again, if we proceed through 2 more vortex-like motions, adding additional circles to the flower of life, eventually we reach the next new complete layer, the final layer as far as it is understood, known as the fruit of life. God has now finished creating the pattern which is used as a template for all material things. Remember, this pattern is still purely imaginary, purely consciousness at this point. You may now be starting to comprehend the basis of the idea that we live in a holographic universe. Everything can be reduced to just 2 things: structure and consciousness, although obviously even structure is derived from consciousness. It is a funny feeling knowing that you exist as a creation of consciousness, of God, given how solid and real the physical world appears. In the next video, I will expand upon some of the patterns and information contained within the forms I showed you in this video, and how this fundamental pattern, nature's first pattern, gives rise to matter, and how it is intimately involved with many aspects of the physical world.